In this section, we are discussing about the historical backgrounds of our constitution. Britishers came to India as traders in the form of English East India Company, and they had the exclusive right to trade with India. Queen Elizabeth gave this exclusive right to English East India Company only. Until 1765, the company had only the trading functions. After this 1765, after the Battle of Boxer, they got the Diwani rights also. Diwani rights means the rights over revenue and the civil justice in the area of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In 1858, in the wake of Sepoy Mutiny, that is the First War of Independence, the British Crown assumed direct responsibility for the governance of India. This continued until independence. There were certain events in the British rule that laid down the legal framework for the organization and functioning of government and administration of the British India. These events are influenced greatly our constitution and polity. They are explained into two major headings, that's a company rule and the crown rule. Under this company rule, the company are the main power, and after the Sepoy Mutiny, the crown rule came to power. It continued until independence. Under company rule, the first one is the Regulating Act of 1773. This is the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of East India Company in India. It recognized for the first time the political and administrative functions of the company, and it laid down the foundation of central administration in India. Features of the Regulating Act of 1773. It designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal and created an Executive Council of four members to assist him. The first Governor General was Warren Hastings, and this act made the governors of Bombay and Madras presidencies subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal. Before these three areas, Bengal, Bombay, and Madras, they were independent of each other. This act provided for the establishment of Supreme Court at Calcutta, it comprising of one Chief Justice and three other judges. And it prohibited the servants of the company from engaging the private trade or accepting the presents from the natives. And it strengthened the control of the British government over the company by requiring the Court of Directors to report on its revenue, civil, and military affairs in India. Next one is the Pitt's India Act of 1784. It distinguished between the commercial and political functions of the company. It allowed the Court of Directors to manage the commercial affairs and created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. This system is called as the double government. It empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all the operations of the civil and military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. The company's territories in India were for the first time called as the British possessions in India by the Act of Pitt's India. The British government was given the supreme control over company's affairs and its administration in India. The next one is the Act of 1786. At this time, Lord Cornwallis was the Governor General of Bengal. He placed the two demands to accept this post. The first one is he should be given the power to override the decisions of his council in special cases, and the second one is he should also be the Commander in Chief. Next one is Charter Act of 1793. This act extended the overriding power given to Lord Cornwallis in the case of councils to all the future governor generals and governors of all the presidencies. And it gave the governor general more powers and control over the governors of the subordinate presidencies, that's Madras and Bombay. And it extended the trade monopoly of the company to another 20 years, and it provided that the commander in chief was not to be a member of the governor general's council unless he was so appointed, and it laid down that the board of control and its staff should be paid out of the Indian revenue. Next chapter is Charter Act of 1813. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India. That is, before this act, the trade is thrown open to East India Company only. After this act, the trade was open to all the British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over trade in tea and trade with China. And it asserted the sovereignty of the British Crown over the company's territories in India. and it allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people, and it provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. And it authorized the local governments in India to impose taxes on persons, and they could also punish the persons for not paying the taxes. Charter Act of 1833, it made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India, and vested in him all the civil and military powers for the first time. The Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India, and this act deprived the governors of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given an exclusive legislative power for the entire British India. These laws made under the previous acts were known as regulations. After this Charter Act of 1833, all the laws made under this act were known as acts. It ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. The Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of open competition for the selection of civil servants, and Indians should not be debarred from holding any place, office, or an employment under the company. But however, this provision was negated after the opposition from the Court of Directors. Next one is Charter Act of 1853. It is separated the legislative and executive functions of the Governor General's Council for the first time. An addition of six new members were the legislative councillors. They are known as legislative councillors to the council. And this separate Governor General's Legislative Council is known as Indian Legislative Council. And it acted as a mini parliament and adopted the same functions as that of the British Parliament. And this act introduced an open competition system of selection and recruitment of civil servants, and it thrown open this coordinated civil service to Indians also. And it appointed a Macaulay committee for the Indian civil service, and it extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possession of Indian territories on trust for the British Crown, but it not specify any particular time period. Before this act, there is a specified time period. That's a 20 years time period was there. Now it's no, they're not specify any particular time period, and it introduced for the first time local representation in Indian Legislative Council. For the six new legislative members, four were appointed by the local government of Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. Next one is the Crown Rule. It started from 1858, that is after the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. It continued until independence. In this Crown Rule, the first one is the Government of India Act of 1858. This enacted in the wake of revolt of 1857. It's also known as the First War of Independence. This act, known as the Act for the Good Government of India, and it abolished the East India Company and it transferred the powers of the government and the territories and its revenues to the British Crown. In the Government of India Act of 1858, India was to be governed by the name of Her Majesty, and it changed the designation of the Governor General of India to the Viceroy of India. The first Viceroy was Lord Canning, and he was the direct representative of the British Crown. And this act ended the double government by abolishing the Board of Control and Court of Directors, and this one created a new office for the Secretary of State for India and vested with complete authority and control over the Indian administration. The Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet itself and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament only. It established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of State for India, and this council was an advisory body only. The Secretary of State was made the chairman of that council. Next one is Indian Council Act of 1861. This act associated Indians with the lawmaking process, and it provided that the Viceroy can nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then Viceroy, nominated three Indians to his legislative council. They were Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao. And this act started decentralization by restoring the legislative powers to Bombay and Madras. And it reversed the centralizing tendency that started from the Regulating Act of 1773, and it reversed to decentralizing policy. This policy of legislative devolution resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. It provided for the establishment of new legislative council for Bengal, northwestern provinces, and Punjab. And this empowered the viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of the council, and it also gave a recognition to the portfolio system. Under this system, the members of the Viceroy's Council can made in charge of one or more departments of the government and was authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the Council. Viceroy is empowered to issue ordinances without the concurrence of the Legislative Council during emergency situations. The life of this ordinance was 6 months. Next one is Indian Council Act of 1892. It increased the additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative council, but they maintained the official majority in them only. It increased the functions of the legislative council and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. It provided for the nomination of some non-official members, that's a central legislative council by the viceroy on the recommendation of provincial legislative council and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and that of the provincial legislative council by the governors on the recommendation of some district board, municipality, university, like that. And the act made a limited and indirect provision for the use of election in filling up some non-official seats. The election means that it's not used in the act, it's just a process of nomination only. Next one is Indian Council Act of 1909. This act was known as Morley-Minto Reform. Morley was the Secretary of State for India and Minto was the Viceroy of India at that time. It increased the size of legislative councils in both the central and provincial level. In the central level, it raised from 16 to 60, and in the provincial level, it was not uniform. It retained the official majority in the central legislative council but allowed the provincial legislative council to have non-official majority. And it gave the permission to ask supplementary questions in the budget section and give permission to move resolutions also. Indian Council Act of 1909 provided for the first time the association of Indians with the executive councils of Viceroy and governors. The Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as the law member. It introduced a system of communal representation for Muslims by accepting the concept of separate electorate. Under this, the Muslim members were to be elected only by the Muslim voters. Thus, the Act legalized the communalism, and the Lord Minto was known as the father of communal electorate. It also provided for the separate representation of presidency, corporation, chambers of commerce, universities, and zamindars.